Nigeria's Supreme Court on Friday upheld the deregistration of 22 political parties by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. The parties were among the 74 scrapped in 2020 by INEC following their poor performances in previous elections. They include the Advanced Congress of Democrats, Advanced Nigeria Democratic Party, All Bending Party, All Grand Alliance Party, and Alliance of Social Democrats. The parties had won at the Court of Appeal, which reversed their deregistration and ordered INEC to restore their registration. INEC later appealed to the Supreme Court to challenge the judgment. The Supreme Court's panel voided and set aside the judgment of the Court of Appeal, Abuja Division, which had nullified the deregistration. Joining me on the news to discuss this and more is Segun Sopitan, our political analyst. Thank you very much for joining us on the news, Segun. All right, let's start before the current situation, as it were. The 22 political parties were initially deregistered by INEC. They appealed their case, and the appeal court granted them a reprieve. On what grounds do you think was that reprieve granted?
The basis, the primary basis for INEC going to the Supreme Court to challenge the decision of the Court of Appeal was something surrounding the issue of notice, fair hearing. And even though I'm not a lawyer, I've been involved personally and over the last couple of years in enough cases to know that the issue of fair hearing is taken very seriously in law, and would always be given a second look if one of the parties to a case raises that. So I think it's on the basis of that fair hearing that that appeal was granted in the first instance, and then INEC then challenged the decision of the appeal court. And so the position of the Supreme Court is very simple: that issue of fair hearing wasn't adequately established by the parties that brought it forward, especially because they also did not give the opposing party, an opportunity to prove that indeed notice had been served on the political parties and other respondents to that case. So I think that was just the main issue for the Supreme Court, and on the basis of that, they upheld the registration of these political parties. And obviously, what that means now is it's the end of the road. It's the final bus stop for those 22 parties, in addition to the others that were also deregistered by INEC who were not parties to this suit in the first place. So it means that this is final and those parties no longer exist as political parties in Nigeria as of today.
As somebody who understands what happens in the political space at the moment, what options do you think these parties now have? Is it possible that they're going to merge with other parties as the election comes up, or you see them getting out of the political space entirely?
Well, so it would always depend on how organized in the first instance those political parties are. For the ones that are adequately organized, that have structures on ground, to a certain degree across the country, they will have negotiating power. They will have something to bring to the table in trying to arrange some sort of a merger or a fusion into the parties that still exist. But if you don't have such structures on ground, then what do you bring to the table? Why should anybody listen to you? So for those parties that don't have those structures, their members will simply, fade into obscurity, or just, meld into other political parties as individuals. And when you do that, obviously you lose some of whatever work that you've done over the last 5, 6, 7 years, depending on when that party was registered. You've lost some of that because you then join as a floor member, so to speak, in the new party that you're going to. So I'm aware, for example, that some of the parties, their members have joined other parties and have already picked up nomination tickets, nomination forms for various positions, governorship positions, senatorial positions, and the likes. So it will depend on the current strength of those parties. But for most of them, I must be honest with you, for most of them, they really didn't have too much in terms of structure on ground, and they probably will just fade into obscurity.
All right, let's talk about the far-reaching implication of this judgment on the Nigerian political space, if any. What could they possibly be?
Well, for me, I'm a bit disappointed with this judgment because there are two angles to this debate. There's the angle of the issue of cost of elections and electioneering costs, and the impact on costs of having such a large number of parties. That's a reasonable concern, but I think there are ways to address that. What this judgment has done is that it has shrunk, the space, the political space, the democratic space. Democracy is about participation and involvement, and you can never have a good governance. I always say that you can never have good governance without engaged and active citizens and without an open an air of openness, where people can express their franchise as they so pleased. What this government has done is that it has empowered INEC to deregister parties, even in situations where you have not had a full election cycle, which is what has happened in this case. Because the argument of a lot of those parties is, before you can deregister us, you must ensure that the local government elections across the various states have been held, and then you look at how we perform. Where we do not win any seats at all, then you have a right to deregister us. Unfortunately, INEC doesn't agree with them. INEC is standing on the ground that, look, we have already, the elections that we conduct, we have seen how you perform, and it's enough for us to determine that you are not strong enough on ground. I don't agree with INEC. I think that we should allow all parties, everybody, the freedom of association to group together based on their ideological similarities or affinities, and then fight for their destinies. Now, one would have thought that, for example, you can have some sort of a league or a collegiate system for political parties where, instead of deregistering them, allow them to participate at the lowest levels of electioneering at the local government and the ward level. And then, depending on their performance there, they can then be promoted to the state level and promoted to the national level. So you can't, for example, field candidates in a National Assembly election or in a presidential election if you have not won at least one seat in the House of Assembly, in the State House of Assembly, or have produced a governor in a state government.
Segun, let me interrupt you and ask that on the flip side of the argument you're putting out is the worry over the number of political parties we have in this country. We know that, at least as of recently, except the figures have changed, we have over 80 political parties operating in this country. Isn't that maybe confusing for the number of people that we have? And you did say yourself, sometimes these political parties aren't really machineries, opportunities for people to excel, but for some persons to make some money or something from other bigger political parties. What's your thinking on that?
I mean, it's a very, very valid concern. And I don't think that anybody that processes information in a logical and analytical manner will question that position. What I'm just saying is that, yes, as valid as that argument is, you also cannot deny people the opportunity to associate as freely as they want. It's a democracy. So, for example, you will not find any of the advanced democracies that we look up to and we try to emulate having this type of closed arrangement in their political space. You allow everybody, to express, their freedom to associate, their freedom of expression. But in order to address the concern you raise, you can have mechanisms that regulate the activities of those parties and which elections that they can participate in, and that will take care of that. But I don't agree that you should shrink the space.
All right, let's move away from the Supreme Court's judgment for a bit on the registration of political parties and go back further to an earlier story we brought on Anti-Continental Prime about Nigeria's ruling All Progressive Congress National Convention, which is scheduled for this Saturday. Now, my first question would be, what's the expectation going by the number of postponement and hiccups the party has witnessed in trying to organize this convention?
Sorry, I didn't catch your question properly. Can you repeat that, please?
I'm asking you about the All Progressive Congress and National Convention that's been finally going to hold this Saturday. But considering all the hiccups that we've witnessed in the process of getting it organized, what are your concerns about this convention?
Well, I mean, look, the concerns are myriad. First of all, obviously, this convention has a direct bearing on the outcome of the 2023 elections, because the National Working Committee that will be put in power, if you like, or put into office as a result of this convention are the ones that will then supervise the process of the next convention, which will be the elected convention that will produce the representatives of the party at the various elections coming up in 2023. So this is a very critical election convention, and all Nigerians should be interested. Some of the concerns that one would have is, for example, this idea of wanting to produce a chairmanship candidate by consensus. I've never liked this idea of consensus. I think it's an extension of the godfatherism problem in the Nigerian political space that we all don't like. It would have been far better to allow everybody that has an interest in that office to freely express that interest and test their popularity at the polls. They're going to be using the indirect primaries system, where they would appoint delegates, and those delegates will vote in the event that the consensus does not work. Bearing in mind that the newly signed Electoral Act has made a provision that a consensus candidate will only be accepted as a consensus candidate where there is a written evidence or letters written by all the other candidates stepping down for that candidate. So if they are unable to produce that in this convention, then they will go to the polls. Another thing that one should be worried about is for a party that says, whose government, the government of the day was elected, on the platform of the APC, and one of the most critical legs in the three agenda that the president rolled out is a fight against corruption. We all know how that is going now. It's been extremely anticlimactic. But to then have a situation where 7 out of the national chairmanship candidates, out of the 7 national chairmanship candidates that have been merged, 5 have active cases with the EFCC. Some for amounts as mind-boggling as 50 billion, naira.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Money laundering cases for their pay coffers.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. I hope we can continue this conversation subsequently, but for now we have to move on. Thank you very much, Segun Sopitan, for sharing your thoughts with us.